purpose of my existence? What's the purpose of my life? You know, is there value to human existence? What's the meaning of life? And I want to really just think about these questions. Happiness, another one, true, meaningful happiness. Well, how can we make sense of this in the absence of God? Now, if we really think about this, and if we really sort of engage this thought experiment for a second and say that there is no creator, there is no God, what are we left with? Well, we're left with a universe, we're left with a world which is a result of just random physical processes. Essentially, that's all it is. It's just the result of random physical happenings. Atoms and molecules have been whizzing around for God knows how many millions of years, trillions of years, colliding into each other at random, which have resulted in everything that we see in existence today. That's essentially what we're left with. In other words, if I was to give you a more of a sort of crude summary, what I'm saying is that we are nothing but a cosmic accident. Everything that we see in existence, including our very existence, is one big accident. That's all it is, at the end of the day, in the absence of God. Now, whether you look at this from the perspective of atheism or naturalism, meaning that all that exists is the physical and everything can be explained via physical processes, if you look at it from any of these outlooks, then you're left with this understanding that everything is one big accident. And if that's the case, then when we entertain the question of ultimate purpose, meaning, value, true lasting happiness, and these types of things, what do they mean? Let's engage with the idea of purpose for a second. Every single human being has grappled with the idea of what is the purpose of my life? What is my ultimate purpose? Every human asks this question at some point in their life. Philosophers, again, have grappled with the question of purpose and meaning for God knows how long, right? It's a question that's always been engaged with. What is the purpose of human existence? Why are we here? Why am I here? Where am I going? These are deep, profound questions every single human being asks themselves at some point. Now, when we think about the question of ultimate purpose, on atheism or naturalism, or on any other outlook or worldview that you may ascribe to which denies the existence of a creator, then you're left with the conclusion that there is no ultimate purpose. How could there be? Because at the end of the day, we're an accident. Everything that exists is a result of one big cosmic accident. This is one big cosmic accident, that's all it is. Right? And accidents don't have a purpose. Right? When you spill milk, it's spilled milk. It doesn't have a purpose. So there is no ultimate purpose from that perspective. What about value? Right? Now, as human beings, we understand and we acknowledge almost intuitively that human beings have value. We have this innate understanding that we are valuable as human beings. Human rights are derived from this sort of innate, intuitive understanding. But again, how do we make sense of the value of a human being? In other words, what would be the difference between me and this glass of water? In the grand scheme of things, if there was no creator, if there was no God, and if everything was a result of just one big, accidental, or everything was one big accidental byproduct of these just lengthy physical processes that have been taking place, what would be the difference between me and that glass of water? If you think about it, at the end of the day, there's no real difference. Now, you may be sitting there thinking, well, hold on a second, of course there's a difference. You're conscious, you're rational, you're sentient, you feel, you have emotions, etc., etc. We will come up with all of these ideas, and that's what will differentiate me between that glass. But if we really think about it, on atheism or naturalism, then the only real difference between me and the glass of water is that that's a specific arrangement of atoms and molecules, and I'm a different arrangement of atoms and molecules. That's the only real difference. That's the only real difference. There is no other difference. Any other idea that we may throw out there, such as you're conscious, you're more complex, etc., etc., these are just ideas. These are ideas that have no intrinsic value or meaning. We may think they do, but they don't really. So we lose purpose, we lose meaning, right? We lose value from that perspective. Now, if you look at it from the perspective of ethics and morals as well, if everything is a result of just blind, random physical processes, and we are just an accident, then what claim do we have to objective moral values and duties? Where do we get objective morals from? How do we ground them? Every single human being is a moral agent. We see something bad, we see something wrong, we speak out against it, right? Whether you're an atheist or a theist, whoever you are, when we see bad, when we see wrong, we speak out against it. But we can't make any objective claims anymore. We lose that ability to make an objective claim We may say something is wrong, but we have nothing to ground it in the absence of God. Because how do you peg morals then? What do you peg morals in? Now you may say, well, we evolved having moral outlook, and evolution doesn't give us morals. It may give us the ability to derive morals, but then even if it does give us that ability, those morals that we eventually come to would be pegged on the drive behind this whole process of evolution, which is what? Survival. It's not about truth, right or wrong, good or bad. It's about survival. Then morals become contingent to that. And morals, in other words, are still subjective, subject to change. Because if we had evolved under other conditions, then our moral outlook would have been different. So it reduces morals down to just something that's just these subjective ideas. Now you may say, okay, not evolution. Maybe we get morals from social consensus. Whatever society decides is right or wrong. Group of people come together and they decide, okay, this is good, this is bad, we should do this, we shouldn't do this. And that's what gives us our moral outlook. But again, then it's subject to the consensus of society or a certain group of people in society. It doesn't render morals objective in any way, shape, or form. So then we run into that problem too. Look at it from the perspective of human rationality. This is another very interesting point of discussion these days, especially amongst the academics, is, okay, if we are to look at it purely from a naturalistic perspective or an evolutionary perspective, how do we account for our truth-bearing rational faculties? The very thing that we use and we engage even as we're doing today. Now I'm standing here, I'm speaking to you, I'm using my rational faculties, and you're listening to me, and you are also, employing your ability to reason, which basically assumes that you have the ability to take in the information I'm giving you, process it, and decide whether you accept it as true or not. How do we make sense of these truth-bearing rational faculties in the absence of God if fundamentally everything is a result of just random physical processes? There's a big problem, right? And at best, you have to remain skeptical about your truth-bearing rational faculties if you were to look at it purely from the perspective of naturalism or atheism. So you run into many problems, and when you start looking at different facets and aspects of reality, you start to realize that, look, in the absence of God, things start to break down. You can't really make sense of reality anymore. You can't make sense of the world anymore. So I would argue that from that perspective, just observing reality and looking at the world around us and our own existence and certain things about our own existence, in the absence of God, we'll realize they just don't make sense. Things break down. And from that perspective, it almost is a sign, if you like, that points us towards a creator. Now, that being said, I do want to share some positive arguments with you today too. But I wanted to put that out there because I want us to really understand that it's not a case of, at least from the Islamic perspective, that look, you need an argument, you need rationality, you need argumentation, you need proof for the existence of God. No, you don't necessarily need that. I would even say that it's just a simple reflection upon the world around us in the absence of God, which will highlight that, God is necessary from so many different perspectives. Now that being said, there's a few ways now that I can take the rest of this discussion today. I can start off by God's existence, but then once I've established God's existence or give you an argument for God's existence, and which you can think about, then I'd have to go and talk about, fine, you may have established God exists, but how do we now know He's one? Right? And then I'll give you another argument for His oneness, and then we'll be like, okay, how do we know the Quran is from God? Because you're a Muslim, right? How do we know that you are talking about your creator is the true creator? How do we establish the Quran is from God? Then I establish that for you. Then we go into, okay, how do we know the Prophet, peace be upon him, was a messenger of God? The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Or I can look at it from a different perspective, and what I'm going to do with you today is I'm going to start with the Prophet, peace be upon him. Because if we could begin and if we could really understand the truthful nature of the Prophet, peace be upon him, then that establishes everything else. Because if the Prophet, peace be upon him, was telling the truth, then the Quran was indeed revealed to him, and then whatever the Quran says must necessarily be true. And it makes things easier for me as well today. So I'm going to take that route today when we go for the rest of the discussion. So let's look at, and by the way, this is not something new. If you look throughout Islamic history, many of the scholars argued for the truth of Islam and even God's existence from the Prophet, peace be upon him, through the Prophet, peace be upon him. So let's really think about the reality of the Prophet, peace be upon him. Now we know, over 1400 years ago, this man, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, came to the Arab lands, to Mecca, and at the age of 40, he made a claim. He said, I am the messenger of God. Right? Now, as with any other claim, there are some possibilities. And when it comes to this particular claim, the Prophet, peace be upon him, could either be lying, he could be deluded or mad, or he could be telling the truth. Those are really the three main possibilities that exist. Now, there are a few others, but we may be able to discuss them in the Q&A later, but they're not really relevant. Those are the three main possibilities to the claim that he was the messenger of God. So let's analyze these claims, or let's look at all of these options and see which one really makes sense from a historical perspective. And by the way, I don't have time to go into it right now, because another question could be, well, why should we trust the history? Right? But what I would say is that if you really understand the sciences, the way that the Muslims preserve their history, and you compare it to just the general understanding of how history is preserved, or Western history, generally speaking, there is a huge difference. Right? And let me just give you guys a quick, if you like, thought experiment to put things into perspective. Imagine for a second you're an archaeologist, and you are told by your boss, whoever you're working for, to go to a specific land and to go and excavate the land and do some digging and some research. Now as you go there, you start digging, and as you dig, you come across a letter. And the letter basically, it speaks of a king that lived in a certain time in history, and some things about his life, etc., and the times. Now you would consider that as history, generally speaking. Right? Now let me give you another scenario. Scenario number 2, again, you're an archaeologist, you're commissioned to go to this particular land and go to dig and excavate there. Now again, you go to the same land you're digging and you come across the same piece of paper. And again, it talks about the king and his life and what was going on. But this time, this letter is accompanied by a second letter. And the second letter basically has a chain of narrators that narrated this letter. And it's got a third letter with it, which basically has a biography of each individual in that chain, speaking about their life and whether they were trustworthy or not. Right? Now, these two examples, if I was to ask you guys, which history would you accept over the other if you were to choose one, which one would you choose? Example 1, or history number 1, or history number 2? Number 2, scenario number 2, right? Because there's a lot more there, right? And this is generally speaking the difference between Islamic history and Western history, right? Obviously, it's a very simplified understanding of it, but it's sufficient for what we're going to be discussing today. So the point being, if you deny the Prophet, peace be upon him, as a historical figure, an individual that existed in history and his life, or what we know of his life, then that's the equivalent of denying the rest of history. And no one in their right mind would put themselves in that position, because if you deny history, you deny all of knowledge, I would argue. Right? We won't be able to know or understand anything if that was the case. So with that understanding, let's assess the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him. Now when we look through his life, let's engage with that first option. Could he be a liar? Could he be a liar? I also really think about this. When we study his life, now we know, and the first thing I want us to understand is, why do human beings lie? Why do we lie as human beings? We normally lie for two main reasons. Number 1, because we want to protect ourselves. And number 2, because we want to gain something. Right? That's just human nature. Children, when they steal sweets from the cupboard, right, and their mother catches them or their father catches them, I didn't do it, right? Because they want to protect themselves, right? So we normally lie for two main reasons: to either protect oneself or to benefit in some way, shape, or form. Okay, now with this understanding, we know that there were many times, occasions, but one particular time in the Prophet, peace be upon him's life, where he was offered everything by the Meccans, by the chiefs of the tribes at the time. When they saw that the Prophet, peace be upon him's message, this revelation that he was coming with, was catching on, people were starting to pay attention to what he was saying. People were starting to follow him. They came to him and they said, look, we will give you whatever you want, just stop preaching this message. On other occasions, they said, look, let's compromise. Sometimes your God, sometimes our God. Right? But they offered him everything. They said, you want money, power, prestige, what do you want? We will give it to you. Stop preaching this message. Right? I want us to really think about this now. The Prophet, peace be upon him, is offered a very clear choice. He's saying, look, what the people are saying to him, take whatever you want, just stop preaching this message. Stop calling people to the worship of one God. You're doing a lot of damage to our economic structures that are in place, to our business. Because remember, the Meccans at the time, there were a lot of idols around the Kaaba, the house in Mecca, the place of prayer. And people would come to do pilgrimage to that place. It was the center of pilgrimage. And that would mean big business, because when people would come in, there would be lots of trade, etc. So they had all the reasons to stop the Prophet, peace be upon him, from preaching this message. So they're offering him everything. And what does the Prophet, peace be upon him, do? How does he respond? What does he say? He says, look, you can offer me whatever you want, and I'm paraphrasing, you can offer me whatever you want, but I will not stop preaching this message. I don't want anything. Okay? Now I want us to really think about this. Think about his psychological state for a second. That does not, his response does not fit the psychology of a lion. Because remember, a lion lies to gain something or to protect themselves in some way, shape, or form. But the Prophet, peace be upon him, has rejected everything from a worldly perspective. He doesn't want money, he doesn't want power, he doesn't want anything. He just wants to spread this revelation that's coming down to him. Now this highlights that he could not be a lion. And on top of this, for one, he doesn't gain anything by doing this, right? Which highlights there was nothing for him to gain from a worldly perspective. He didn't want anything for his message. But secondly, his refusal of what they were saying and him persisting in wanting to just continue to share this message resulted in the Muslims being boycotted. It put the Muslims in a very difficult position. They were pushed, they were thrown, forced out of their houses, they were made to starve. The Meccans were told not to sell things to them, to not give them food, etc. So it defeats both of those objectives a lion normally has. He had nothing to benefit, and he wasn't protecting himself or the early Muslims in any way, shape, or form. So he could not be a liar. If we were to claim he was a liar, then no one ever told the truth in history. So he couldn't be a liar. Well, could he be mad or deluded? Because this is another thing some of the people have said regarding the Prophet, peace be upon him. Let's think about this for a second. Could he be a liar? Could he be deluded or mad? Now again, if you study his life and you look at his teachings and you see the way he conducted his life, just look at his sayings, any reasonable person will conclude that this man was not mad or deluded. Because mad or deluded people are not statesmen, they're not spiritual leaders, they're not family men. Mad or deluded people are found in mental asylums, right? They don't run the world. They don't run, a group of people. Although obviously from today's perspective, it's arguable that crazy people are running the world, yeah? But generally speaking, mad people are found in mental asylums, at the outskirts of society. They're just shunned by everyone. But the Prophet, peace be upon him, so he was a very intelligent, rational human being, a very wise human being. Right? He was a brilliant businessman. We know from his life before Prophet, he was one of the best businessmen. So his character, what he did, what he said, it does not befit the character of a deluded or a madman. If you look at the Quran, look at his sayings, the message is consistent. It wasn't the case that one day he said God is one, and the second day he said God is three, and the fourth day he said God is 5 or 10. No, the message was consistent in every way, shape, or form. A proper study of the Quran, a proper study of the prophetic tradition reveals that there is a clear consistency in his message throughout the time that he was given revelation. So you can't claim him mad or deluded. Therefore, the only real conclusion we're left with was that he was telling the truth. When he said that he is the messenger of God, when he said that he is receiving revelation from God, that he was telling the truth. Now further to support this, when you read the Quran and when you study the Quran, one thing that becomes very explicit and very clear is that the Quran, the only person the Quran benefits is its recipient. Let me say that again. The only person the Quran benefits, the message benefits, is its recipient. That's us. That's the people that engage with it and read it. From the very beginning. God says what? هُدًى لِلنَّاسِ. This is guidance for mankind. ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. This is a book in which there is no doubt. It's a guidance for those that are conscious of God. It's guidance for humanity. The predominant, the core message of the Quran is what? Who can help? What's the core? What's that foundational core message of the Quran? Sorry? Okay, yeah, Allah is one, but more specifically, what's the Quran about? What is the Quran fundamentally about? It's guidance for humanity, but what is it guiding human beings back to? What is it reminding people of?
Submission of God.
Submission of God. In other words, the Quran is telling humanity of its true purpose. That fundamental question, what is my purpose? The Quran answers. And we would expect that if there's revelation from the creator of the heavens and the earth, that he would answer this fundamental question. The Quran's fundamental point of focus is that God created human beings to worship Him, to know Him and to worship Him. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. Right? That God created the jinn kind, but now it's specifically mankind for no other reason except to know Him and to worship Him. Right? Now that's the fundamental message. Now when it comes to worshiping God, we'll touch upon this in a second, because I want us to have a very clear understanding of what that means. Right? But that's the fundamental message. And what's even more beautiful is that being the fundamental message, everything else in the Quran is there to facilitate this purpose. Everything else in the Quran is there to help us and fulfill the purpose of our life, which is to worship our Creator. So we're successful here, we're successful in the next life. So at the end of the day, point being that the message of the Quran is for its recipient, it's for us. There's nothing in it that's benefiting the Prophet, peace be upon him, from a worldly perspective. Right? There's nothing there that's even benefiting God, because God tells us He's ghani. He's free of need. He's the rich. We know from the traditions that if every single human being in existence was to turn to God and to worship God in the most perfect way possible, this would not increase the majesty of God in the slightest. And if every single human being in existence was to turn away from God and never worship Him, this will not take anything away from the majesty of God. He's free of need. It's not for God, it's for us. And if it's for us, then what reason is there for anyone to make up the Quran? Again, supporting the first point that I made, that the Prophet, peace be upon him, was indeed truthful in his claim. Now these are things to think about, right? And you may think, oh, these are, clear syllogisms or clear rational arguments, but that's not my objective here today. I want us to think beyond that. It's beyond that binary way of God's existence. Okay, is there a logical, rational argument for God's existence which has premises and conclusions? And then I'm going to break those down and attack those and see if I can produce something. But no, it's far deeper than that. It's far more profound than that. And it's far simpler than that as well. Right? All it takes is just sincere pondering over these realities. Now the next thing, the Prophet, if we can conclude and understand that the Prophet, peace be upon him, was telling the truth, therefore when he says that the Quran was revealed to him by the Creator, that indeed the Quran was from the Creator. Now what does the Quran say about the Creator? Right? Are there arguments in the Quran for God's existence? Now, here's what I want to highlight quickly so that we really understand this. Seldom in the Quran, hardly anywhere will you find arguments that are there or even verses where you can say that from these verses we can derive arguments for God's existence. The purpose of the Quran is not to prove God's existence because that's self-evident. The purpose of the Quran is to bring humanity back to the purpose of their lives, back to that reality, which is that we were created to know God and to worship Him. That being said, there are some places in the Quran where there are some verses which allude to some very powerful arguments that you could derive some very powerful arguments from. For example, chapter 52, verse 35 and 36. Right? Chapter 52, verses 35 and 36 are some phenomenal verses. These were the bedrock for many of the Muslim theologians throughout history, in particular those that derive the Kalam cosmological argument, for example, right? But I don't want to look at these verses from a sort of very logical, abstract way today. What I want to do is just reflect upon them in a very simple way, okay? Now, in those verses, God says some very profound things. He says, firstly, or were they created by nothing, or were they the creators of themselves? Now, remember, primary recipients are those present at the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, but by extension us, everyone, all of humanity, right? So were they created by nothing, or were they the creators of themselves? And in the next verse God says, or did they create the heavens and the earth? But rather they are not certain. Now let's really think about this. There are three main possibilities which emerge from these verses. The first is, and I want us to apply these or reflect upon these possibilities, firstly from the perspective of the primary audience, which is us, and secondly, apply them to where they can be applied. And I'll explain what I mean in a second. But let's apply them to us. The first thing God asks is, were they created by nothing? Did we come from nothing? Can anything come from nothing? Now let's think about this, right? And it's clearly understood that out of nothing, nothing comes. Nothing has no potential to produce anything. Nothing is nothing, right? If I give this brother that's sitting in front of me this thing, bro, hold on to it, okay, catch. Take care of it, give me at the end of the lecture. What have I given it? What have I given it? Nothing, right? So what's he going to give me back? Nothing, right? Out of nothing, nothing comes. Okay? So we couldn't come from nothing. Then God says, were they the creators of themselves? Can something create itself? This is something I want us to really think about and reflect upon. So that out of nothing, nothing comes. That's impossible. But can something create itself? What do you guys think? Can something create itself? Something can create itself. How can something create it? No? Yes? No? Okay, let me put it this way. Me, can I create myself? No. Because for me to create myself, what has to happen? For me to create myself, I have to already exist. And if I already exist, then there's no question of me creating myself because I'm already there. So in other words, for me to create myself, I have to exist and not exist at the very same time, which is impossible. It's a paradox. It just doesn't make any sense. Right? And then God says, were they the creators of the heavens and the earth? Now what's profound about these verses is the shift here. And I want us to pay attention to this. The first verse speaks about us human beings. So the focus is on me. I'm thinking about myself. Can I come from nothing? Can I create myself? No, no. And then God shifts. He says, did you create the heavens and the earth? Forget about yourself. You can't even account for your own existence. What about everything that exists around you? This entire universe, this entire cosmos. Where did that come from? Right? And the dishonest person will stand just be baffled here at this point. Like, of course, I can't even make sense of my own existence. How am I going to make sense of this entire universe? Especially when it precedes my existence. The universe came before me, before all of us. So how can we create something that came before us? And then God says, but rather they are not certain. So He leaves the conclusion open to us to conclude. He wants us to engage our own rational faculties and come to the most reasonable and rational conclusion, that it was God who created us. Now what's very interesting about these verses is that the scholars have said that these logical possibilities can be applied to anything that begins to exist. Okay? So these logical possibilities can be applied to anything that begins to exist. Let's therefore apply these to the universe. Right? Now let's think about the universe. Could the universe come from nothing? Could the universe come from nothing? Again, same problem. Out of nothing, nothing comes. Right? Could the universe create itself? Again, same problem. Because for the universe to create itself, it has to already exist. And if it already exists, then it's not bringing itself into existence. Could the universe be created by something that came after it? Firstly, let's look at it from this perspective. Could the universe be created by something that comes after its existence? No, because the universe came first, right? Now, another way you can apply this point is you can ask, well, could the universe be created by something else created? That's a possibility, right? Because what God is saying here, or were they the creators of the heavens and the earth? One way to think about this is that can something created create something else? Right? So I'm trying to do away with all the possibilities, right? So could the universe be created by something else created? This is possible. This is possible. The universe could be created. For example, universe 1 that we exist in could be created by universe 2. Just hypothetically speaking, right? And universe 2, therefore, well, we can ask the question, what created universe 2? And we can say, well, universe 3 created universe 2. And we can ask the question again, well, what created universe 3? Well, universe 4 created universe 3. And you can keep going. What created universe 4? Universe 5 created universe 4. But if we go on forever, would we ever have universe 1? And the answer is no, because you can't traverse the infinite. It's impossible to traverse the infinite. Let me give you a simpler example to really put this into perspective. I come from London, right? So imagine tonight, for me to go home, I have to get on a bus. The event of me getting on the bus, that's the event that needs to take place. I have to get on the bus. But for me to get on the bus, I need to borrow a pound coin because I don't have any money. And I need £1 to get on the bus. So what I do is I ask this gentleman here, I said, can I have a pound coin? And he's a nice guy, he says, I would love to give you a pound coin, but I don't have a pound coin. So he says, let me ask the person next to me. He asked the person next to him, says, can you give me a pound coin so I can give him around a pound coin so he can go home to London, back to London? He says, sure, I'd love to give you a pound coin, but I don't have a pound coin, so let me ask the person next to me. And he says the same thing, I'd love to give you a pound coin so you can give him a pound coin so you can give me a pound coin so I can go to London. But he says, I don't have a pound coin, I have to get the pound coin of the person next to me. And say that carries on all the way across these rows. Every single person in this chain goes out of this room for an infinite chain. There's an infinite number of people in this chain that are asking for permission. Now the question is, would the event of me getting on the bus and going home ever take place? If there's an infinite chain of people asking for a pound coin, would I ever end up getting on the bus and going home? The answer is no. There has to be that first person in the chain that gives the pound coin for it to eventually make it to me so I can give it to the bus driver and go home. Right? So you can't traverse the infinite. Right? That's the point. So there has to be a first cause from that perspective. Right? And in a very beautiful way, when we sort of go through a process of elimination, the only real conclusion we're left with is that the universe was created by an uncreated creator. And that's who we believe Allah is, that's who God is. That's how God describes himself in the Quran. That he has no beginning, he has no end. Right? He is uniquely one. He is the necessary first cause of everything that exists. So and again, the reason I'm sharing this with you, although I don't believe rational arguments are that necessary, because most people that do believe, don't believe because they've been convinced by a philosophical rational argument. Right? It's for deeper, more profound reasons. But I wanted to share this because I wanted to highlight that the Quran does engage the human being on every single level. On an emotional level, on a spiritual level, on an intellectual and rational level, every single level. And that's something profound about the Quran. Right? So, that being said, hopefully I've given you guys some things to think about, at least from the perspective of God's existence and as far as reasons are concerned. But I want to focus now the rest of the discussion, next 10 minutes or so, on something a bit more, what I believe is far more profound. Which is, okay, fine, once you come to the understanding that there is a creator that created everything, right? What does that now mean for our lives? What does that mean for us as human beings? I mean, if we think about it from this perspective, if you just say, I believe, and you go back to your daily lives and continue to live the way you were living, and it doesn't change you in any way, shape, or form, then I would even ask the question, well, what point is there in believing? Right? What difference does it make to you? And this brings me back to the point which the Quran highlights, which is the purpose of human existence, which is the focus of the Quran, which is what's actually significant to our existence in this life. Where God says that He created us for no other reason except to worship Him. Right? This is the crux of the message of the Quran, and this is what I believe we need to really focus on, which is, what is worship? What is worship from the Islamic perspective? Now, worship in Islam isn't just praying 5 times a day or doing the ritualistic acts that we see Muslims engage in, like giving charity, fasting in Ramadan, etc. Those are aspects of worship. Worship in Islam is very comprehensive, meaning that your entire life can be a form of worship if it's done with the right intention and the right awareness of the Creator. Right? Everything we do can be a form of worship. Helping the old lady across the road, right? Helping your parents, taking care of your parents, doing good, being there for others. All of these are aspects of worship, right? And these are outlined in the Quran for us, to be upright, good human beings that help humanity, right? Those become aspects of worship when we do it with the right intention. And what's really profound is, some people may think, especially in the times that we live in. Now, the 21st century is a very interesting time to be alive in, because from a material perspective, we have everything, right? Many of us, I would even say every single one of us in this room right now, our lives are more, what can you say, they have more luxuries, we have more amenities than the kings of the past, right? We have food on tap, running water in our houses, you can access it whenever you like. Most of us have a car, or at least a bike, right? We have a house. We have all of these things, which people in the past, even the most richest and the most elite of people in the past didn't have, right? So from a material perspective, we're doing quite well. We're doing really well, right? But there is something still missing. There is something still missing. I mean, it's interesting when you look at the correlation that, you know, the rates of the consumption of Prozac and all of these antidepressants are on the rise. When we are, from a material perspective, have everything. It highlights something is missing. We're looking for something as human beings. And on top of this, these luxuries, what they do is that they give us this false sense of independence, right? That and you'll notice this when you speak to people about God's existence. You're like, let's engage with that question. Most people hold the position, well, I'm not interested. I'm not interested. I'm busy. I'm happy with life. Everything is good. You know, I don't need God. I'm a free person. I'm liberated. I live in a free society. I do what I want to do. That's the type of mindset people have. But what I want to sort of posit to you now, and what I want to highlight now, or an idea that I want to put out there, is that no one is free. As soon as you are born in this existence, every single human being is born into slavery. Every single human being falls into the slavery of something or the other. I want us to really think about this. Every single human being submits to and worships something. Loads of people in the times we live in are slaves of materialism. They almost worship the material world. It's all about something they love the most, they adore the most, and they follow the most. That's essentially what submission is. That's what worship is. Some people are a slave to materialism. Others are a slave to other people. Some people are a slave of different ideologies and different systems. Some people, even if you take the most extreme case, the type of person that says, look, I don't follow anything or anyone. I don't submit to a person, an idea. I don't follow anyone or anything. I do what I want to do. As soon as they say that, what they're actually saying is that they are a slave of themselves. They submit to themselves. They are a slave of their own desires, their wants, the self. Now, it's a very interesting idea, because if you really think about this, no one is really free. Everyone is submitting to something or the other. But what's profound is that Islam is giving you a profound option, a choice. Who do you want to be a slave of? What do you want to be a slave of? Do you want to be a slave of the Creator and submit to the Creator of the heavens and the earth? And by doing so, you are fulfilling the purpose of your existence, and you will find peace and tranquility in this life and the good and the best in the hereafter? Or do you want to be a slave of created things? Those things that just have no intrinsic power, no worth, no value. Those things that are as weak as you, and in many cases weaker than you. I don't know about you, but the rational individual will think about this choice and say, you know what, I'd rather submit myself to the Creator of the heavens and the earth than those things that are created. Because in submitting to God, and if you really are fascinated by this idea of liberation and freedom, and you want to truly be free, I would even argue that the only way to truly be free, at least from a material, worldly perspective, is to submit yourself to your Creator. Because as soon as you submit to Allah, to God, at that moment, you are free from everything else. You are submitting to God, you're not submitting to anything created in it. You are truly liberated from that perspective. So if you truly want liberation, the only way to really achieve that is to submit yourself to God, and in doing so, you free yourself from all of these ephemeral shackles. You're not a slave to people, you're not a slave to ideas, you're not a slave to opinions, you're not a slave to any of these things anymore. You are truly liberated and truly free. And another profound thing that comes from this, and there's many, but just for the lack of time, one last thing I want to quickly share is this idea of, human beings, we are always in a state of anxiety. And we're dependent, and we're always relying upon things or people or whatever else there is. We're always relying upon things, we're depending upon things. And what we notice throughout life is that things and people always let us down. We're always let down. We let ourselves down, right? And this keeps us in this constant state of almost panic and anxiety to some level. Everyone's different, but we always have this sense of panic and anxiety. We always try to make sure that we're in control of life and in control of all of the situations that unfold in our lives. We're always worried about what's going to happen tomorrow, about what's going to happen in a week's time, a month's time, 10 years' time. You know, we're always worried about these things. But what's amazing is that when you submit yourself to God, at least one profound benefit that comes from this is that you realize you're submitting yourself to the one that has power over everything, the one that's controlling everything, the one that's taking care of all of your affairs. And when you submit to Him and you put your trust in Him, which is an aspect of worshiping Him, which is to rely upon God, after you do whatever you can do from a worldly perspective, this, if you truly do this, this frees you from that panic and that worry and that anxiety. And this is how it brings true balance to the human being. You're calm. You know whatever unfolds in your life is because of God. If you go through something hard, a trial, a tribulation, you know it's from God. And you know inevitably there is good in this for you. And if something good comes to you, you're grateful. You know, and the Prophet, peace be upon him, made a profound statement, and if I can remember it correctly, he said something along the lines of, strange is the condition of the believer. Everything is good. You know, when something difficult befalls him, he is patient, because he knows it's from his Creator, and there's good in that for him. And that's good for him. And when something good comes to him, he's grateful. And that's good for him. And that's a very profound state to be in as human beings. It just removes that unnecessary anxiety and worry, because you know you're in the best of hands. Right? So the very last thing, I guess very last thing I want to share with you, and anyone that's at this point, whether you're someone that's looking into Islam and you know it makes sense, but you are still just reluctant to pass that bridge, cross over that bridge. And even if you're a Muslim, you know, someone that's been practicing, because what ends up happening even as Muslims is that we like to be in a comfort zone. Right? Even when it comes to submission to God and worshiping Him, we like to be in that comfort zone. We do the bare minimum, whatever's sufficient. Right? And when we put ourselves in that position, we think we're doing good, but when we have that sort of half-hearted submission, it doesn't save us from all of these problems. Right? We still have the anxiety, we still have the worries, we still don't feel that closeness to God and that connection with Him, as we may have felt at some point. So one thing we need to think about is if we realize this is the truth, if you're a Muslim or someone that's realized they're not yet a Muslim, is to take those first steps and to submit yourself to your Creator. Is to make that leap of faith, if you like, but that this leap of faith is not blind. It's based on a clear understanding, as we've discussed some of those things already today. And when you make that leap, that across the bridge is the most beautiful place. You will find that peace and tranquility. You will have that closest connection to God. When you taste that closeness, when your heart experiences, and now I know I'm talking about metaphysical realities now, right? But it's important to talk about this because we live in a very we live in a world which is just focused on the here and now. Seeing is believing. Empiricism is the way to truth. Yeah, and we have these ideologies which are drummed into our minds from a very early age. But there is far more to life. When you really submit yourself to God and you feel that connection with Him, at that point, I can guarantee you, no argument would suffice. You won't be interested in arguments, because you would have experienced something which is far more profound than just syllogisms and logical arguments. But it's to allow yourself to make that sacrifice and submit to God. If you think about any great person throughout history, every single great person, whether Muslim or non-Muslim, has made sacrifices in their life. Right? Without sacrifice, you won't achieve anything. We have to make those sacrifices. If it means you're a non-Muslim, but you know the truth of Islam, but you're just reluctant, you have to make the sacrifice and cross over. If you're a Muslim that's been Muslim all their life and you're in that comfort zone, you have to make the sacrifice to break that comfort zone and fully submit to your Creator. And it's on the other side that you will find true success. Right? Many examples. The prophets of God were the ones that made the greatest sacrifices. Right? The prophets of God. Abraham is known as the friend of God. He didn't achieve that title for no reason. He made the most sacrifices. And we can read about his sacrifices. Right? Think about some of the companions. You know, sometimes we think about the prophets and we think that they're up there and we're down here. Just think about some of the companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him. Right? One example that comes to mind is of an individual named Musab ibn Umair. Now he was a profound guy. He was a young guy. He lived in Mecca. He had everything from a material perspective. He wore the best clothes. he had the best perfumes, he had everything from a worldly perspective, right? You can consider him a millionaire. He gave everything up for the truth. So much so that his parents, they stripped him from all of his wealth, everything, he gave it all up, right? And he was successful in the grand scheme of things. From a worldly, material perspective, you think, there was points when the Prophet, when he got to Medina, for example, and he was given a sermon at one occasion, and his companions were sitting with him, and Musab ibn Umair came into the gathering, and some of the companions that recognized him from Mecca, they looked at him and they started crying, because he's wearing a blanket with holes in it, and this was the guy that had everything, and he gave it all up for the truth. He sacrificed, and this is what we need to do as human beings. If we want to be successful in this life and the hereafter, we have to make those sacrifices. Sometimes those sacrifices may be those sort of egotistical barriers that we have inside of us. I don't want to submit to God. I don't want to worship Him. I'm an intelligent, rational human being. I don't need God. Right? Sometimes it's the barriers of arrogance. Right? Sometimes it's just the barriers of just being comfortable. Sometimes it's a barrier of change. Should I become Muslim? It's such a great change. But unless we make those sacrifices, we won't be successful. So hopefully I've given you guys some things to think about. Thank you guys for being patient and listening. We'll open up to Q&A.